has to be one of the most insipid songs that was ever written. And it was number one, I believe, for 8 weeks on the charts back in the late 80s, Bobby McFerrin. It was so bad that my singing group in school sang it. And I was the one doing the cuckoos in the background the whole time because that's all they trusted me with. I wish it were that easy. Don't worry, be happy. Just like, snap your fingers and you flip a switch. And suddenly whatever it was that you were worried about, it's gone, you're not worried, and you're just happy as can be. I've never experienced that in my lifetime. I don't know if any of you have. It's just not that simple. It's not real. Telling someone who's worried or afraid, don't worry, don't be afraid. Oh, that helps. There's got to be something more to this dealing with worry than just saying something like that. Now, think about this. Whatever you've been worried about, whatever's been keeping you up at night. There's all sorts of things. What's the biggest one? Is it the state of the world with the wars or the economy, the election? Is it more personal? Is it, having an aging parent or grandparent, or you got a doctor's appointment coming up, or you're waiting on test results? Maybe it's the finances at home, the job, or the lack thereof. Maybe it's the kids. Maybe you want them home safe and sound, except they're in their 20s now and you can't control them. And I think in the last few seconds, if you weren't worried about anything, I probably just helped you out a ton, didn't I? But that's how worry works. It has a way of finding us. And worry has a big brother. His name is fear. And their daddy is doubt. See, as for worry, what we worry about the most often reveals where we trust God the least. That's just how it is. And Jesus addresses this in Matthew 6. This is the Sermon on the Mount, and he takes a whole section of this message to talk specifically about worry. He tells everybody, do not worry about your life. And he talks about the birds of the air, how God takes care of them, and you're worth a lot more to God than the birds. And then verse 27, I love this. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? It's meant to be a rhetorical question, but it seems like we figure out if I worry hard enough, it'll help. It'll make things better, my worrying. Worry is a force that has no ending. There's no result. There's no turn of events. It just exists and is meant to continue existing. But it's been around for quite a long time. Like I said, worry most often reveals where we trust God the least. And trusting God has been a problem for people since there have been people. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, God gave them everything. They had everything they needed. There was absolutely nothing wrong, nothing missing, nothing bad. But then the serpent shows up, Satan says to the woman, did God really say? And you see how he's working there? Trying to get her to doubt the trustworthiness of God, of God's word. Did he really say that? Did God really say you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? You see, the devil's been trying the same tactic with every single one of us ever since. Trying to get that wedge between us and God, between us and the promises of God and the word of God. And so ultimately, we are going to have to answer one of the most fundamental questions for all of humanity. Is God trustworthy? See, the atheists and the pagans have already answered that for themselves with a resounding no. And, they, good luck with that. But we still have to figure out the answer to that question too. Those of us who claim to believe in God, because believing in God is trusting God. Is God trustworthy? When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, that it was desirable to make one wise, she took some of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband with her, and he ate. There's their answer to the question. And the consequences were severe. Our attitude toward God should align a little closer with King David in Psalm 62. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. This is God saying, try me. Go ahead, try him. Experience God. Get to know him, who he is, how he rolls. And it takes quite a bit of time and quite a bit of repetition to fully embrace and absorb just how trustworthy God truly is. And that repetition thing is key, because God is not like a one-shot inoculation and you're set for life. Because the devil will not leave you alone. He will keep coming after you, which is why we have to keep coming to God to fill up on the power of his mercy and grace, the power of his word and his presence in our lives. That takes repetition. Because you don't trust everyone you meet, not when you first meet them. If I went around the room right now and asked you for your wallet without any explanation, just give me your wallet. Some of you know me well enough that you might actually do it, because he's a pastor. He'll give it back with most of its contents. But a few of you are a little newer here, and you aren't going for that. But if we get to know each other a little better through repetition, through time, well, maybe it would be a little different. That's how it is with God. He is faithful to all of his promises, to his unconditional love, to his covenant of grace. And that's how we're going to get past this immovable force called worry. But to bridge that gap between don't worry and be happy, Jesus is going to tell us what comes in between. In Matthew 6, he says it. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be taken care of. You seek God first. Now, the trustworthiness of God, he has well established throughout human history and throughout our history as well. But there's three things we know about God that we can count on with God. Number one is that God has been faithful before. If you go back to the Israelites in the Old Testament, they're in slavery in Egypt in the book of Exodus. 400 years they're there, and they cry out to God, and God hears their cries. And so he leads them out, sends Moses, gets them out of slavery, out of Egypt, starts heading them towards the promised land, back home. And in chapter 13 of Exodus, Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you departed from Egypt, from the house of slavery. For by a powerful hand, the Lord brought you out from this place. And there's God's command to his people. Remember who I am and what I've done for you. Remember what I've gotten you through, how I have delivered you and saved you. Remember that, because we can be awfully forgetful about the things that God has done. Martin Luther said he preached justification by grace through faith in Jesus Christ every single Sunday. He says, because every single Sunday my people forgot about it. So we need to remember who God is and what he has done, because he does listen. He heard the cries of his people, so he delivered them. He got them out of Egypt. He took on Pharaoh, all those plagues, the Red Sea parting, stops the Egyptian army in its tracks, leads them across the wilderness with a cloud by day and fire by night. He provides them water when they're thirsty. He gives them food when they're hungry in the middle of the desert. God says, remember that. Remember how I brought you out. Jesus does the same thing. When his disciples are gathered at the table one last time, and he feeds them his own body and blood, given and shed for their forgiveness. He says, do this in remembrance of me. Remember. This is who God is. This is how he works. And God will often inspire his people to construct some sort of visual remembrance of that deliverance, of that encounter, that experience with God. Quite often in the Old Testament, it'd be a pile of rocks. Now, we don't have any pictures, but hopefully it was a very pretty pile of rocks. But, there's a lot of desert land there. They did what they could. But they would pile the rocks in sort of a makeshift altar or monument to God, remembering what he has done. Jacob did that when he encountered God by the Jabbok River. You have Moses and the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. There's always going to be the remembrance of this place. Jesus does that too. He gives us the visible sign of remembrance when he hands us a piece of bread and says, this is my body. Remember me. Or if you need the ultimate sign of remembering what God has done, look right up there. If God has done it before, he can do it again. If he has rescued us, delivered us before, he will keep doing it. God has been faithful before. God is also faithful today, because he doesn't just do it once and then set us adrift and leave us to our own devices. No, he keeps coming with this mercy and grace. So the Israelites, they're getting through the wilderness, getting back towards the land of Canaan, the promised land. Oh, but there's people living there, and those people don't want to leave. They're going to fight. And the Israelites start to worry about this, because maybe we're not big enough, tough enough, strong enough to do this. And Moses and Aaron are trying to exhort the Israelites to trust God. But it ends up being the young man Joshua who puts it to words. In Numbers 14, he says, do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. You see, our success is not dependent upon what we see with our eyes, nor is it dependent upon the size of our opposition or our perception of their strength and our weakness. Our success is dependent upon the presence of God in our lives. We've got God. When Jesus came into the world, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 1, his name shall be called Emmanuel, which means what? God with us. And in the last chapter of Matthew's Gospel, the resurrected Jesus, the very last thing he says in the Gospel of Matthew is, I am with you always to the end of time. He will never leave us, never forsake us. And yet the devil is going to try and convince us that that's exactly what God has done. Because you have this big enemy in front of you, or you cannot see the hand of God or the plan of God, so therefore you maybe want to start worrying. But everything the devil says is a lie. He wants us to think God is too far away, or that we're not good enough or important enough for God to spend time and energy on little old us. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. God is faithful to his promise. I am with you always. And the thing about his trustworthiness is not that every single time we get into a difficult situation, he pulls us out of it magically, mystically. No, that's not it. It's that every single time we get into a difficult situation, Jesus enters into the situation with us. You never face anything alone. We're like little kids. You remember when you were little and your room was just a little too dark? And, well, you never know if there really are monsters under the bed. So you walk out to the living room and say, Mom, I can't sleep. And she says, well, get a drink of water. You get a drink of water and you go back, and 20 seconds later, you're back out in the living room. Mom, I still can't sleep. She says, well, did you say your prayers? Okay, you go in and not even 30 seconds of prayer, you come back out. Mom, it didn't work. And you know what you're aiming for. Mom, I want you to come in there with me. And so she does, and she comes in and she tucks you in. And then she'll sit right there on the bed next to you until you fall asleep. See, that's what we need from God sometimes. And he will do it. He will remind us that he is here. God is faithful today. And God will be faithful tomorrow. He said that. I'm never going to leave you. I will never stop loving you unconditionally. I will deliver you. And that's how God, by his track record on his promises, inspires in us the ability to trust. Because trust isn't something we have. No, trust is a verb in the Bible. It's something we do. In the book of Numbers, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites, which I am giving to the Israelites. Not which you are taking from the Canaanites or you are winning in battle. God says, I am giving this to you. See, that's the thing. The Israelites kept forgetting something. God said that he is giving the land to them before they even got there. These bunch of worriers and doubters needed to know this ahead of time. The end of the story has already been written. And you are not the author. You are not the author of your own story. Consider the words of Hebrews chapter 12. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, remember him, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. Because the end of the story has already been written. And if you want to know how it turns out, if you want to see the end, well, right? Go to the back of the book. Revelation 21, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. All the things we worry about. All the stuff that's coming up or that might happen. They're gone forever. For the old order of things has passed away. He was seated on the throne, said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. On Thursday, Debbie and I remembered the 30th birthday of our son Adam, which also happened to be the day he died. It was our first pregnancy, and Debbie was 22 and a half weeks along when she went into premature labor. That's way too early. At 24 weeks, there's a chance for viability. But at 22 and a half, no. A week and a half, 10 days. But God took our son home with him. 4 months later, she's pregnant again. And what happened the last time, all of those thoughts, those worries and fears and doubts come in, and she miscarries. And I was mad. At that point, I invited the whole doubt family, and the worry, the fear, the doubt, I gave them a place to stay. But God had to walk me through it and talk me through it and bring us out of that darkness. The following January, we find out she's pregnant the third time. And in July, well, the baby was coming early. But see, this time the doctors knew what the problem was. And so Debbie had undergone a procedure to hold the baby in there. So by July, though, she's 31 weeks along, 7 months. So this time we knew we were bringing home a baby. So my daughter Erin shows up way too early because she has always been impatient. But she's born with cerebral palsy. Affects her legs, her balance, her trunk. Doesn't affect her mind because she turned out to be a straight A student, top of her class, magna cum laude, double major. And now she's living on her own and getting married spring of next year. It worked out. But God really had to show us something. He had to teach me that with time and repetition, He will drive the doubt family out. And He will restore the trust, the hope, the joy. And the one person who taught me all of this, the one who taught me Jesus, music, sports, cribbage, was my mother. 5 years ago this weekend, she went to be with Jesus. And she had been diagnosed with leukemia, given 2 weeks to live, and I went and spent as much time with her as I could. And it occurred to me as I'm sitting with her that, you know what, Mom? You're going to get to meet Adam before I do. And she says, sucks to be you. No, she didn't say that. Keep this in mind. What are you holding on to? What's holding you back? Who are you inviting in and asking to stay? Because you can hold on to something better. And do not trust in your own trusting, your own power of believing. Look at me, how great a Christian I am, because the devil will set you up for a fall. Trust in Jesus. It's that simple. Trust in Jesus.